What if we put an age limit on the presidency? Just to make myself clear right out of the gate, I am not trying to be ageist in this video in any way, shape, or form. Welcome back to Hypotheticals, everyone. There are quite a few more of you than last time. Thanks for all of your support on my most recent video. That thing was a tremendous undertaking for me, and it's nice to see it's paying off. Anyways, today we're sticking in politics. As of July 21st, 2024, Joe Biden has officially dropped out of the 2024 election. Soon after dropping out, Biden immediately endorsed his current Vice President Kamala Harris to be the Democratic nominee. Since it's increasingly likely she will be the nominee, I'll have a video or two regarding her coming in the near future. But let's get back to today's topic. Biden's age had been making media headlines for a while, especially after increased calls to drop out of the race from fellow Democrats following his disastrous debate performance. It seemed like Biden dropping out was inevitable given the way things have trended over the past few weeks. But was the situation avoidable? What if, to prevent something like this from happening, we placed an upper age limit on the presidency? In today's video, I'm going to be exploring placing an upper age limit on the office of the presidency, how that would have impacted history had it been in place since the very beginning of the United States, and what the likelihood of something like this ever happening is. We're also going to examine how something like that would shake up the 2024 election, even with Biden already out, so stay tuned for that. Without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so first things first, some very quick history. The US declared its independence from the British in 1776. They fight the war, they dump the tea in the harbor, they win the war, and they send those redcoats packing. Anyways, after that, in 1787, the Constitution was adopted, which basically laid the foundation for our government as we know it today. This is important to us today because in Article 2 of the Constitution, it says that the President of the United States must be a natural-born citizen of the US and that they must be at least 35 years of age. Today, we're going to be rewriting this portion of the Constitution to include an upper age limit as well. For the video's sake, I'm going to be putting that age limit at 65 years old at the time of inauguration. We'll also add a caveat that says if they win at the age of 65, they can run as an incumbent the next election as well. In other words, the oldest a president can be when they leave office now is 73. That's not really important for the video, I just like the additional detail. I think it's a nice touch. Anyways, how would that have impacted history? You might be thinking that since our current options are so old, it's always been like this. But that, in fact, is not the case. In reality, most presidents have historically been in their 50s when being inaugurated, aka when they started their term. The median age for all presidents at their first inauguration is 55 years old. The youngest ever president was Theodore Roosevelt, who began his first term in 1901 at the age of 42. Meanwhile, the oldest ever was, you guessed it, Joe Biden, who began his first term in 2021 at the age of 78. In total, there have been 19 presidents who were between the ages of 60 and 69 when they were inaugurated, and only 4 presidents who were over the age of 70 when inaugurated. I realize I'm saying inaugurated a lot, sorry about that. Let's go back to our change in history though. Believe it or not, only 5 presidents in US history have been above the age of 65 at the beginning of their first term. This means that none of them would have been able to even run if the Constitution included an upper age limit of 65 for the presidency. Let's talk about them one by one, going in order of when they were elected. First up is William Henry Harrison, who was 68 years old at the time of his inauguration. Harrison was elected in 1841, making him the 9th president in US history. At 68, he was the oldest president ever at the time and wouldn't be dethroned from that honor for over 100 years. He also served just 32 days in office before dying from pneumonia, making this the shortest presidency in US history. In other words, had he been ineligible to run for president, not much would have changed because he simply didn't get much done for the 1 month he was in office. Fast forward 15 years or so to James Buchanan, who was about 65 and a half years old when he took office in 1857. I know that's technically 65, but I'm including him because he kinda sucked. You'll learn why in a second. Buchanan was the last president before the onset of the American Civil War, and according to the National Constitution Center, he's regarded by many historians as the worst president in US history. But why? Let's read a bit more from the National Constitution Center. Quote, in his inaugural address, Buchanan called the territorial issue of slavery a matter of little practical importance. He had been tipped off about the Supreme Court's decision in the Dred Scott v. Sanford case, which came shortly after the inauguration. Buchanan supported the theory that states and territories had a right to determine if they would allow slavery. There were also reports Buchanan may have influenced the court's ruling. The Dred Scott decision angered and solidified Buchanan's Republican opponents, and it drove a wedge into the Democratic Party. The country also went into an economic recession as the Civil War approached. For reference, Dred Scott v. Sanford basically ruled that slaves were not citizens of the United States and couldn't expect any protection from the federal government or courts. It also ruled that Congress had no authority to ban slavery in any federal territories. Anyways, just a couple months before Abraham Abraham Lincoln took office, Buchanan delivered a State of the Union address to Congress, where he told them that he believed the South's secession from the country wasn't legal, but that the federal government didn't have the power to stop it. This basically set the stage for the Civil War. However, in our alternate timeline, Buchanan is never allowed to run. Now, that doesn't mean the Civil War wouldn't have happened, as there were a ton of things that factored into that happening, but it does mean that the country could have had some better leadership prior to the war occurring. One other option for the presidency would have been John C. Fremont, who ran against Buchanan as a Republican and finished second in the race. Fremont opposed slavery, so that would have led to even more tension with the South, but perhaps his leadership would have been a bit better. I can't go into all the details because otherwise this video would be super long, but I'd highly recommend reading more about Fremont's life at the link in my sources. That dude had a wild ride. Let's now move forward over 100 years to the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. Reagan was nearly 70 years old when he officially took office, making him ineligible to be president with our alternate constitution. Depending on who you ask, Reagan is either viewed as having been a great president or a pretty bad one. He's remembered by many as an incredible speechmaker and visionary, and the man who played a massive role in taking down the Soviet Union and defeating communism. Others remember him as the man who accelerated the war on drugs and screwed up the economy via trickle-down economics. Regardless of how you view him though, we can all agree his impact on the United States remains one of the largest of any presidency to this day, due in part because he served 2 terms. If Reagan had been ineligible, it's likely that the election of 1980 would have gone to another Republican, mainly because Democrat incumbent Jimmy Carter was extremely unpopular. Reagan carried 44 states against Carter and secured 489 electoral votes. Had Reagan not been the Republican nominee, it's likely that his vice president, George H.W. Bush, would have gotten the gig. Bush ran against Reagan in the primaries and was a major factor before Reagan secured the nomination. In other words, we likely would have seen a George H.W. Bush presidency a decade earlier than it actually happened. And Bush likely would have won re-election in 1984 because he would have been going up against Walter Mondale, who secured a measly 13 electoral votes against Reagan in the actual 1984 election. Anyways, without Reagan ever as president, our economic system would look a whole lot different. Trickle-down economics would have never been as prominent, which some argue are the reason for the increasing wealth gap today. Additionally, it's possible that Bush would not have expanded the war on drugs as much as Reagan did, which eventually led to over 400,000 non-violent drug incarcerations in 1997. Compare that to just 50,000 non-violent drug incarcerations in 1980, and you can see that the war on drugs greatly added to the number of people in our prison systems. However, he also basically ended the Cold War, and the Soviet Union fell largely because of his influence. So that would have been a massive change in history as well. Who knows how things would have gone if Bush were in charge during that time. Regardless, Reagan's influence to this day remains huge, and there's plenty more he did that I can't cover in this video. Had he never run, the world today would look awfully different. With that in mind, let's now examine some more recent elections to see how our new presidential age limit would impact things. Just a quick warning, this section is going to get a bit unhinged. That's all I'll say, so now you have a heads up. Before getting into the 2024 election, let's first review the 2016 and 2020 elections. In other words, we're going to go over 2 separate hypothetical scenarios in this section of the video. Scenario 1 is the one I presented previously, that an age limit for the presidency has been in place since the very beginning of the US. If that had been the case, then the 2016 election would have looked awfully different. For one, Donald Trump wouldn't have been allowed to run. He was 70 in 2016. Hillary Clinton wouldn't have been allowed to run either, as she was 68. Both of those are obviously above the 65-year-old age limit I set previously. So who would have been the candidates for both parties? With the age limit we set, it's tough to say for Democrats. Bernie Sanders, who finished second in the primaries, would have been too old as well. Joe Biden never ran in 2016, but he still would have been too old even if he tried. Because both Clinton and Sanders would have been too old, we need to figure out a new nominee entirely. No one else who actually ran had a real shot at the presidency, but perhaps someone who declined to run would have actually ran if Clinton and Sanders were out of the race. Going back as far as 2013, the oldest polls I could find about who people believe should be the Democratic nominee for 2016 suggest that Clinton was still the heavy favorite back then. Elizabeth Warren was receiving double-digit support back then too, but she was also too old. Quick side note, you may think with how many candidates I'm eliminating based on their age that the age limit I set is too low. But remember, the median age for presidents historically is 55. Just keep that in mind. Anyways, the person I could find with the most support support to run historically but ended up not running and still fit our age limit is former New York City Governor Andrew Cuomo. Because of that, I'm going to make him the 2016 Democratic nominee for president. I realize that might be a huge stretch. I don't care. It's for the video's sake. On the Republican side, this is a lot easier. As previously mentioned, Trump can't run, so we'll turn to the man who came in second in the Republican primaries, Ted Cruz. That means that our 2016 election would have been Cuomo versus Cruz. My guess here is that Cuomo would have won because I don't believe that Cruz possesses the persona that Trump had to win in 2016, but I could be wrong. Either way, let's move to 2020. In 2020, we had incumbent Donald Trump face off against Joe Biden. Obviously, both of these guys are ineligible, so let's nominate two new people. Assuming Cuomo didn't do an absolutely atrocious job during his presidency, we'll make him the Democratic nominee as an incumbent, although his sexual harassment allegations could have totally ruined his re-election odds. For Republicans, it's a bit harder to find a nominee. Since Trump didn't have any competition in 2020, we'll have to come up with a new one. In this alternate universe, Republicans see Cuomo running again, and seeing how he defeated Cruz in 2016, decide for another candidate. Marco Rubio, who finished third in the 2016 Republican primaries and is well below the age limit, is who they opt for, making the 2020 election a matchup between Cuomo and Rubio. And you know what? I'll let you decide who would win this hypothetical election. Comment down below and let me know your reasoning. I realize this video is getting pretty wild, but it's all in good fun, right? In the spirit of things, let's now make it even crazier. Let's say, hypothetically, as of today, an age limit is magically put on the presidency. Had Biden not stepped down already, he would have had to do so, and Trump now has to do so as well. Aside from the fact that this would probably cause a civil war, or at the very least major civil unrest, who would the new nominees be? On the Democratic side, as I've already mentioned, Kamala Harris is the most obvious nominee after spending 3.5 years so far as Biden's vice president. Who she'll choose as her own VP is still up in the air, but we'll discuss that in a future video. The Republican side is a lot more interesting. Trump recently chose young Ohio Senator J.D. Vance as his running mate, so it's possible that Republican delegates would simply choose him if Trump is forced to leave the race. However, it's also possible that people like Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy could re-enter and vie for the candidacy. Since Vance is now Trump's VP pick, I'm going to assume that many delegates who were for Trump would then bounce to Vance. Vance would be very young for a presidential candidate, as he's currently only 39 years old. If he were to win a hypothetical election against Harris, he would be the youngest president in US history. So ignoring the possible civil war, who would win this hypothetical matchup? Considering Harris's pretty low approval rating as VP, I'd argue Vance has the advantage here. He's previously demonized Trump, referring to him as America's Hitler in the past, so he may be able to appeal to more moderate Republicans and independent voters. However, considering Trump picked him as a running mate, he clearly also possesses some traits that would allow him to appeal to Trump voters. Again, this second hypothetical scenario is separate from the previous ones we talked about with the 2016 and 2020 elections. Because this age limit is being put in place now and not at the beginning of America's history, the Trump voter base still exists, and they are very pissed off about what just happened. Biden's previous voters, meanwhile, are pretty happy with Kamala as their candidate. After all, recent polls showed that nearly 2/3 of Democrats wanted Biden to drop out, so they got their wish. Forget all of this though. Is an age limit for the presidency actually possible? What would it take to make that happen? It's time to move on from talking hypothetical elections and get to the actual facts. In reality, the odds of an age limit ever being placed on the presidency are very low. The reason for that is because a constitutional amendment would be needed. To pass constitutional amendments, one must first be requested by 2/3 of the states. It can also be proposed by passing by 2/3 in both the Senate and the House. After either of those, the amendment must then be ratified by 3/4 of the state's legislatures. In other words, it's a very long process, so it wouldn't be easy to do at all. In fact, it would be extremely difficult. I highly doubt the majority of this country supports putting an age limit on the presidency, and to be honest, I'm kind of with them. The cap of 65 in this video was purely hypothetical, and I don't think it makes sense to bar anyone above a certain age from holding the most important job in the world. However, I also don't think it makes sense at all to have someone who is clearly suffering from cognitive decline to hold the most important job in the world. That's not me trying to hate on Biden, and I don't mean any disrespect to him, but he was clearly struggling. There's no doubt about that. I personally believe potential presidents shouldn't be barred based purely on age, but cognitive ability is something that's necessary for the job. If you aren't able to be on top of your game mentally all the time, you should not be able to be president. Maybe some sort of official cognitive test is what's needed. Feel free to disagree with me in the comments though. Anyways, that's all I've got for this hypothetical. If you enjoyed it, feel free to like and subscribe. More videos coming soon. If you're interested in learning more about this topic, feel free to check out my sources in the description down below. I realize this video got a bit crazy, so if you're looking for my potential reasoning, reading the sources is probably a good idea. Remember though, all of this was in good fun. It wasn't meant to be super realistic. Apologies for the slight delay on this video too. Life has been kinda chaotic. Thank you again for all the support you've shown me recently. I'm really excited to see where I can take this channel. Hope I see you again soon for my next video. Take care.